On your own from the age of 15. Reckless, aggressive, and undisciplined.
This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel.
We have a mission for you. A major weapons test is imminent. We need to know what it is and how to destroy it.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
My Nerd World.
And welcome to it. It's episode number 54 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. I am your host, John Justice. Glad you're with the show again this week. If you missed it, there was a special bonus edition of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast a few days ago. Be sure to check it out on iTunes, or if you follow on Podbean or Stitcher or wherever your finer podcasts are. No, there was a lot of information that came out from Entertainment Weekly, including a bunch of character details that I went over earlier in the week and covered sort of on a breaking news podcast. So again, if you missed that one, be sure to go and check it out. It is available for download if you haven't already gone and listened to it. So for this week's podcast, there was more details about Rogue One that came out from Entertainment Weekly. We'll talk a bit about that. Some more photos were released. Nothing too substantial. At first I was a little bit disappointed, to be honest with you, but I went ahead and went back and looked at some of the photos that had been released for The Force Awakens right around the same time frame. As a matter of fact, Entertainment Weekly did something similar for the Force Awakens, although they did it much later in the game than they did for Rogue One. A lot of the speculation around that is that Disney and Lucasfilm wanted to quell some of the concerns over the reshoots, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But when I went back and looked at the photos that were released prior to any further details of The Force Awakens, trailers, right, the full trailer or the teaser trailer, it pretty much falls in line with the level of information and photos that we got the last time. I guess for me personally, I was really hoping for some more photos of the vehicles or environments, and what we ended up getting were some fairly generic shots. There were some interesting shots. A photograph of stormtroopers walking on a beachfront that looked like it was in a tropical location, similar to what we saw at the end with the ACTs, they're calling them, at the end of the trailer. There were some shots of the Death Troopers we'll talk a little bit about, because there's a few significant items on there, on their outfits that I want to point to. But really nothing too revealing. Most of the major information came out earlier in the week. There was quite a bit of coverage about the reshoots, and we will talk about that. I'm not going to go into detail about what was written, but I am going to give you basically my opinion of what I believe they were trying to convey in the article, and again, trying to put to rest any fears that people have. And personally, I'm going to present my own argument as to why we don't have really much to worry about as it relates to Rogue One and what kind of movie it's going to be. We'll talk about that coming up. Also, we'll talk a little bit about Mon Mothma, who is going to have a larger role. That was one of the other profiles that Entertainment Weekly put out this week, so we'll talk a bit about that. But first off, let's talk about those few photos that we did see and the vibe that I'm getting so far from Rogue One based off of what Entertainment Weekly released after the character profiles. Now, again, we really didn't get much of anything as it relates to pictures that provided us with more insight into the movie. We ended up getting colored versions of some of the black and white character pictures that we saw earlier in the week with those character profiles. Some more scenes that are taking place on that beachfront with the characters we've already seen. There was one shot of Jyn Erso and Diego Luna's character in what looked like one of the transports that they used, the First Order used in The Force Awakens. Now, for those that don't know, they recycled quite a few of the set pieces from The Force Awakens for Rogue One in order to mitigate some of the costs of the film. One of the things that they did was they retrofitted those First Order transports, the ones that look kind of like space submarines, the boxy ships that have the little tower on top. You're going to see a version of those in Rogue One. I'm very curious to see how they end up handling that, because I don't have a problem with seeing those ships again. I thought they were really cool. And just for further clarification, those are the ships at the very opening of the film that the First Order uses when they land on Jakku in the village before they go and wipe the village out in the opening scene of the movie. I'm interested to see what their version looks like of the Empire, because we've never seen those ships before. And so if the Empire was using these transport ships, I'm going to venture a guess that it simply was a situation where we didn't ever have an opportunity in the original trilogy to have a group of stormtroopers be transported to a location where we, as the viewers, would have seen them. But it will be odd unless they really changed them up to see those same ships from The Force Awakens that the First Order used, seeing the Empire using them, unless they made some major modifications to them. And this goes back to an argument that I've laid out before, or a desire, if you will, that I personally would have no problem whatsoever in if Disney and Lucasfilm went back and did special editions to the original trilogy and just added in little bits here and there to close in some of the gaps of the spaceships that we'll see in Rogue One that aren't going to match anything that we saw in the original trilogy. You know, that TIE Striker looks different than anything that we've seen. It looks like an early version of the Interceptor. And so, again, I hear a lot of people online making this comment. And there is something to be said about it. They've been pointing out how here you have Rogue One that is going to have some different looking ships and different vehicles that we haven't seen before. And yet in The Force Awakens, we really just got slightly changed versions of the ships that we saw the last time. Now, I'm not sure how much of that's a fair argument. I think they changed up the X-Wings enough, and the First Order TIE Fighters, especially the Special Forces TIE Fighters with the red and had the beefed up solar panels on the side. I thought that those were really cool looking and were enough of a deviation from what we saw in the original trilogy that it didn't take me out of the film in thinking about it. However, I do agree with other individuals when they talk about the fact that we didn't see more diversity in ships. I would have liked to have seen something completely new from the First Order, apart from that transport. I would have liked to have seen a new version of a Y-Wing or a new version of an A-Wing, and I know we're going to end up seeing those in Episode 8, but these are just small things to appease the fan in me who loves vehicles. So back to the photograph. So there's one photo that looks like there's Jyn standing in one of those transports, and I'm very curious to see how much they ended up changing those again for Rogue One as compared to The Force Awakens. Now, a couple of the really interesting shots, in my view, are of the Death Troopers. These are the black stormtroopers. And if you've clicked on the pictures, you've seen them. You saw them in the trailer, okay? They're the ones that have sort of the elongated stormtrooper helmet in the front, and they're all black. There's some very interesting, however, design elements in those outfits that leads me to believe that they may be a part of a certain bad guy that everybody knows is coming back. There was one particular shot that showed sort of the full, a really good standing shot of one of these Death Troopers. And he's standing on this hill. It doesn't look like it looks like a different planet. It doesn't look like the jungle planet or the water planet. And in his hand, he's holding a stormtrooper doll. And in the write-up for the picture, it says, that doll's going to have some type of significance in the film. And it was funny, when I first saw it, I immediately was drawn to the hand of this Death Trooper, and I was like, oh, hey, that looks like, oh, yeah, it is. It's a little Stormtrooper doll. Now, it's not too far out of the norm. We saw that Daisy Ridley had created a Rebel pilot doll that was sitting on a shelf at the beginning of The Force Awakens. But you look at the outfits for the Death Troopers, and what's really interesting is that the belt buckle for all these Death Troopers is exactly the same belt buckle as what Darth Vader has. We know Darth Vader's going to be in the film, but it's the same belt buckle as Darth Vader. And as a matter of fact, the lower, cod piece for like the crotch is almost exactly the same as the one that Darth Vader uses. It has the sort of the oval or pill-shaped panel over the crotch area. And then when you look at the helmet itself and the fact that it's been changed from the typical Stormtrooper helmet, I can't help but wonder, and maybe this has been talked about before, but I wonder if these Death Troopers aren't sent ahead or aren't the actual troopers for Darth Vader. I'm wondering if these troopers are essentially Darth Vader's unit. And these are the guys that he sends out on these special missions, and therefore that's why they actually kind of look like him in certain design elements, being all black, having some pieces that are very derivative of what Darth Vader wears. And even the helmet itself, when you begin thinking of it in those terms, the helmet itself has some echoes of Darth Vader's helmet. So I'm wondering if these Death Squad troopers aren't somehow directly tied to Vader, like they're sort of the forward team that Vader sends out before, getting involved himself. We do know that Vader's going to have a presence in the movie. In the articles, Kathleen Kennedy said that he would be in it, although not as much, and we talked about this quite a bit in the bonus episode. Not as much as people might want, but again, he can't have such a pivotal role that it takes away from the newer characters. It sounds like he's going to come in a few times throughout the movie and then will come in a very significant way towards the end of the film, which makes a lot of sense. Because if the film ends 10 minutes before A New Hope begins, then obviously no spoilers here, we all know how the story goes. Obviously this team of rebels that are the cast of this movie are successful in beaming the Death Star plans to the Tantive 4? I always get that wrong. Tantive 4, Tantive 5, anyways. To Princess Leia's starship, right? And therefore Darth Vader goes after her. So I imagine the end of the movie, may or may not have Darth Vader on that Star Destroyer heading off and chasing down Princess Leia towards the end. So these Death Troopers, though, we don't ever see them again. And they do allude to this in the Entertainment Weekly article. They talk about how, the question mark of, why don't we see these particular characters again? Or why don't we even see these ships again? And that there might be a very specific reason why. I think the fate of a lot of these characters from this movie is going to be a bad one come the end of the film before we move into A New Hope. And I think a part of that might even be these Death Troopers. They might end up finding out that they weren't as effective as they thought, and they go at them alone. It does match up, though, when you think about A New Hope and Darth Vader, and at the end of A New Hope, when Darth Vader goes and gets on his advanced TIE fighter to go take part in the Death Star battle, he's flanked by two of those black TIE fighter pilots. And so those are very reminiscent of those Death Troopers as well. So again, I personally think those Death Troopers are going to be directly tied into Darth Vader in some way, shape or form.
The dark side.
Now, the other big reveal with the Entertainment Weekly news that came out this week was that Mon Mothma was going to have a fairly prominent role in the film. Actress Genevieve O'Reilly is going to be reprising her role as Mon Mothma. She was actually in Revenge of the Sith in a scene that was cut from the film that personally I wished hadn't been. The scene that was cut from Revenge of the Sith was one where we saw the seeds of the rebellion begin to form. Padme and Mon Mothma are there with a group of individuals talking about splitting off and forming this rebellion, and I personally wish they would have left that in there. But Now we flash forward, and this same actress is going to be reprising her